Right, if I can just welcome everybody to the first meeting of the Catchment Resilience Committee meeting. Deputy Chair of the committee, Craig Pauling, will do a welcome.
O tēnei te ruru te kaukau mai nei ki hai mā whitiwhiti ki hai mā rakaraka ni whakanui o te ruru te reko he pō he ao kaua tia tihei mauri ora. Ka huri au taka whakaro ki nga tini aitua, e nā mate, o ia marae, o ia takiwa, haere atu rā. A rātou ki a rātou, tātou ki a tātou, tonga ora, nā kai kaunihera, nā kaimahi, a tēnā koutou, ki a koe, Ian, te kaihautu o tēnei komiti, a tēnā koe, ai, nei mai hara mai ki tēnei komiti, whakahaumanu o nā aua, tēnei te mihi ki a koutou, ai, tākina te Karakia, tūtaua. Tūtaua mai I runga, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e hui e tāki e. Kia ora koutou.
Sure, thank you, Craig. Right, I've been informed there's a quorum present and we can declare the meeting open. We have an apology from Councillor East, who's on council business. Are there any other apologies? None, I think everybody's here. Are there any conflicts of interest to items on today's agenda? I don't think so. We have no public forums, deputations or petitions today. Is there any extraordinary or urgent business? I understand that there is none, thank you. And there are other notices of motion? Again, none, thank you. We have no minutes, as we haven't had this is a new committee. So we note that this is the first, so we will ask that the Catchment Resilience Committee notes that this is the first meeting of the Catchment Resilience Committee, and therefore there are no prior minutes to confirm. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Joe. Joe Davies. Any discussion? Those in favour, please say aye. Against, no. Thank you. Page 9 of the agenda. We'll move on to report items. 8.1, update Catchment Resilience Committee terms of reference. Marie Willits will introduce this report. Marie, you're in person. Thank you, Marie.
Tēnā koutou katoa. The purpose of this paper is to seek a resolution to make amendments to the terms of reference for this committee. Updating the terms of reference will provide for consistency and clarity across the committee structure. The key points are also to avoid gaps and duplication. I think some of the changes include ensuring that the purpose of the committee is focused on the governance and strategic responsibilities. One of the key points that has been added in is reference to Braided River Revival, Whakamutunga awa a Pākihi. There's another point that's ensuring that the specific responsibilities of the committee identify the oversight, direction, monitoring and advocacy roles, and also aggregating the specific monitoring and review responsibilities. So that was one of the points where there were quite a number of specific points in the previous terms of reference, and they've been aggregated. So those things will still able to be included, but it won't be restrictive to those that will be open. There's also the point which has been added to other committees, I understand, as to the ability to change the terms of reference of the committee if the committee includes all council members.
Thank you, Marie. Are there any questions or clarification from Marie? Thank you, Marie. You may now leave the table, apparently. So is there any further discussion, or I'll put the motion that the Catchment Resilience Committee recommends to Council they adopt the amended terms of reference the Catchment Resilience Committee in attachment 8.11. Do I have, thank you, Yayan, mover, seconder, thank you, Nick. Is there any discussion of the motion? No discussion. I'll put the motion then. All in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Marie, if you come back up again, please. So Marie, if I can ask you to outline the purpose of 8.2, which is the Catchment Resilience Committee strategic focus.
The purpose of this paper is to give the committee an opportunity to consider and agree a strategic focus. As we just went through, the committee's terms of reference set out their purpose and their specific responsibilities and delegations. This paper is more about the themes that will, the proposed themes to reflect a governance focus. They don't change the work program at all. They're more about a focus of where a governance and strategic oversight would benefit the program. The three themes that have been put forward here are co-investment in central government input, which I think speaks for itself with the need for further investment and with central government to address the issues. Getting our own house in order, making sure that the things that we're required to do in Canterbury are well articulated, that we've got ways to fund them and that we have work programs to do them, and enabling delivery and outcomes, which is part of the reporting process, which is also part of your role.
Thank you, Marie. And look, if I may just add, just reinforce that the purpose of the strategic focus isn't to change the work plan for the staff. That is in the LTP, and these three themes cover everything that is being done. So this isn't a revolutionary change, but it is to help this council, us as councillors, to understand our governance oversight role and think about how we can add value to the process that David and his team has to in terms of implementing work program. And if I can just sort of touch on all three parts to the strategy. Co-investment in central government input. It's about, I mean, this is a strategy that's been driven by the regional sector, led by North Island chairs of regional councils, but we are clearly a significant focus on that. So what is our role in governance in supporting that? It's clearly supporting the regional sector approach, but it's also talking to our members of parliament to try to lobby them to think about the merits of this line of argument. The second focus, which is getting our own house in order, is about how we think about the individual catchments that we represent in terms of our constituency, and talking to our constituents about what it is they want in terms of protection from floods, how we fund it, and a raft of other things. And it's not about telling our staff how to do it. It's actually about trying to liaise between our catchments, our communities, and our staff who are implementing the policies. And the third one is enabling delivery and outcomes. And when we look at when we look at some of our work programs, there are challenges that our river engineers and our catchment managers have to think about. And it's things such as gravel abstraction strategy and or process, where have we enabled our team to be able to do that in a pragmatic and practical approach, or have we put a whole lot of barriers in there to make it more difficult than it needs to be? Other things that we can do from a governance perspective to facilitate enabling stuff to happen. And perhaps a good example is the fact that our consent to spray our rivers and the use of glyphosate and other chemicals is up for renewal. What would happen if we can't renew that consent? What does that mean for the management of our rivers in terms of cost and implications for the biodiversity values of our braided river systems if we can't use? And so can we as councillors play a role in the community in terms of encouraging our constituents to see the value of various components of operations, if you like? But it's not an excuse for us to get into operations. So this is governance view. So questions, please, from Marie. Thank you, Noel.
Tēnā koe I te mana, mea te kia koe, Marie. Look, I just cast your eye on the recommendations 1.2, and this could be purely semantics. I think the optics of it is that when you talk about getting our house in order, kind of to me feels like it's dysfunctional. Already. Just that term. Someone else is reading it.
Thanks, Tom. Do you want to answer that, Marie?
So we can change the wording if you want. I think it's well understood what it means. Yes, it's colloquial. I agree.
You could argue that to a certain extent our house isn't in order, and we are a little dysfunctional in some of our catchments because we've inherited the catchment board model, which a lot of our communities are saying now that perhaps is no longer fit for purpose.
Okay, kia ora. So in that context, I understand then what this is actually about. So what you're saying is that some of them are actually dysfunctional and about getting our house in order. Okay, cool.
And part of that, Nook, is that if we're successful in 1.1, we want to make sure that we've got the best systems in place so that if there is central government funding that will come our way, that we are in the best position possible to corner some of that money. And I think dysfunctional is perhaps not the right term, but there are a lot of things we could do better. Not because our team is not doing it right, but because the structures we have in place are historical. Time has moved. Any questions from Marie, please? I should talk to you about. Vicky.
I'm just going to dig a bit more into that, getting your house in order. Because when I saw it, because my understanding, and perhaps the staff at the front can correct me on this, is when the recommendations are sitting, that's really what comes through in the minutes. And they should sort of stand on their own. And when I first read the recommendations, I was like, getting your house in order, what on earth does that mean? So it sort of didn't, but yeah, I just, you know, and it maybe is semantics, but like they should be able to stand on their own and people understand, you know, if you look at the minutes, what does it mean? And it comes under the heading, it doesn't get used, that phraseology doesn't get used anywhere in the rest of the paper. There is the heading planning and preparation, which is what I presume getting your house in order is referring to, in which case, why don't we put planning and preparation? And if planning and preparation doesn't cover it, because we've got to add something else, well, then what's the other bit of word that goes in under that? So I didn't feel comfortable with getting my house in order.
So look, I changed the words from planning and preparation to getting a house in order because I thought, in my mind, getting a house in order was what we wanted this to say. Planning and preparation didn't cover the subject entirely, and planning, it's not just about planning. This is about a change in mindset in some circumstances.
I tend to agree with Councillor Southworth that we've struggled last training to get visibility on what we're trying to do. I know we know what that means. I do know we know what that means, but I have some sympathy for the suggestion that people that are interested in our work in rivers, which there'll be more and more people, will look at these minutes and go, "Whoa, why should we give you any money? Your house is not in order, mate."
Are we in discussion or questions? I'll like to respond, but we'll go later.
Well, are there any questions from Marie?
A specific question, which well, I'll ask it because it sits in the paper here, but it also really ties in with subsequent paper around current priorities, looking at rating changes for Selwyn, Waikiriki and Ashley Satapuri, and that they'll be considered in the next long-term plan. My question really is, you know, if we've been hearing about, particularly the Waikiriki, I remember that being something that Mayor Sam Broughton's brought to us now, certainly last year, if not the year before as well. Been on the conversation for a while. Like, does our response being to push things into the long-term plan really fit with the sort of magnitude of risk and the fact that we have communities who are actually wanting to do something and wanting to be rated in order to deliver something that protects them from weather? that could happen tomorrow. And so, you know, my question, I suppose, is there a mechanism that we could use that means we could be addressing the issue when the community is wanting us to in a more expedient way, rather than it having to be pushed out to the long-term plan? And what if someone comes in near the next long-term plan and we're going, oh, well, next time we get the opportunity, it's going to be the next long-term plan, which is another 3 years away. So like, it just doesn't feel fit for purpose to me. And this is something we need to do here. That's probably a big question. And it's the wording and the planning and preparation that's able to ask the question. It's probably not quite in the right context or the right place, but I'll check it out there. It'd be great to have an answer.
Lee may be better placed, I know she's online, to answer that question. My response would be that the planning and preparation section is precisely looking at those issues. What are your priorities, and how do we gather that money to address those priorities? That's traditionally done in a long-term plan. It could be done in an annual plan, and that's where the co-investment with government and all the rest of these themes that are proposed here will address those kind of issues. Obviously, the scale of the magnitude of the work is a lot bigger than we're currently addressing proactively, and I think that's part of what this is about. It's thinking, looking forward. That leaves on.
Lee, you look like you want to say something.
I was just going to help Marie out. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just add that the direction to look specifically at the Selwyn Waikirikiri and the Ashidakahuri came from the previous council. It doesn't mean that they're higher risk rivers than others. The Selwyn does have areas that are, less than 150 years in standard. So we have a very vocal Mayor Sam, who is very keen to do something. The commitment staff made was to bring it to the next long-term plan because we hadn't come up with all the options, although Selwyn District Council has put some options on the table. Given current resourcing pressures, we haven't had a chance to do the work before now, but staff are actively working on it for the long-term plan.
Thanks, Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps just to assist and thinking about the reflection on the wording of 1.2, because I guess what this point is trying to get at is about refining and improving our approaches, because in the face of all of the challenges that we have for managing our rivers and waterways, it is about being the agility that we need to have to respond. And when we've got processes that are long-term plans, annual planning, catchment committees, all of those layers, they don't necessarily add up to the way to be best enabling you to be making decisions. So perhaps wording around refining and improving our approaches is better wording than, or better way to say it than getting our house in order.
Thank you, David. Look, if it's okay with the council, we might move into discussion. And so thank you, Marie, for sitting up here, because I think most of the questions were actually more discussion than questions, and it was slightly unfair on you. But thank you for your presentation. So if I can now open it up for discussion. So John, do you want to have it?
Look, thank you. When I read 1.2, getting our own house in order, I immediately knew what we were talking about, having been engaged and involved in the schemes and the space that we're in. And one of the frustrations for me over time is that we have lots of bureaucratic responses and statements that say we shall do this, that, and the other, but it doesn't really tell the truth. We were in a meeting this morning with the chair and others, and having a conversation, and it is the simple conversations and the simple words that have the cut through and the understanding. So for me, getting our house in order is quite apt, because that's what it's about. It's us accepting and owning that we're not there and that we need to do more work. So yeah, we can tweak it a little bit, but it is about getting our house in order in simple language that people understand. And to the Selwyn work, I am pleased that it's underway, but would definitely like to see it sped up if it could be, given that work has happened, and whether it can be put into an annual plan, given there are options on the table from Selwyn District as to how it might be funded and worked through. So we're not starting with a blank piece of paper. Just my thoughts there.
Yeah, Chair, just to
A point of order. Are we putting the motion first and then I have an amendment to propose? We're about to put the motion, and in doing so, I'm going to propose an amendment to 1.2 in line with the discussion. But I've got to put the motion as it is on the order papers, and then we will amend 1.2 along the lines of the discussion that's already taken place in line with David's suggestion. And then if that is approved, that will become substantive motion, and then we can open up further amendments. So can I have a move and a seconder, please, for the thank you, Craig. Thank you, Greg. I'll move that an amendment, therefore, that 1.2, we change the wording to so the proposal is that 1.2 is changed to refining and improving our approaches, as opposed to getting our house in order. Are the mover and seconder happy that becomes? Are you happy to move and second? But 1.2 is replaced with refining and improving our approaches. Are you happy? I'm happy. I'm happy, Craig, if you're happy. So this is. Cool. Okay. So are we clear? We have a moved and seconder for this. So I'll open that up for discussion. Claire, and then.
Thank you very much. I'm a bit like John. I did understand what it was, what the previous, with the first recommendation on the paper, or the second recommendation did mean. And I did agree that I didn't think that we could have planning and preparation there. So I'm pleased that we've now come up with the alternative. So very supportive of what's on there. And I do like this fact that we're just going to keep them very simple and very high level, because then we haven't got stuff that's actually fixed in stone, and it gives you a little bit more flexibility and broadness for staff who are obviously doing everything from a legislative point of view, from a policy point of view that we've got. And it allows us to be agile and adaptable, as our acting operations manager pointed out. So very supportive of that one.
Dion.
Yeah, excuse me. I was going to make a suggestion, just based on the disquiet that was had the conversation, and especially with what Chair Scott was saying around the external look in. One of the suggestions that I just was thinking in my mind there was, in the recommendations, just put a note of the points that are referenced in the actual report, so that it's pretty damn clear what they're actually meaning. So, like point 1.2 would reference point 12, 13, and 14 within the report, and then there's no question about what they're actually meaning. That was all I was just sort of going to raise that, and it's probably a good process to do that kind of thing anyway. Doesn't take away from the substantive, it's only just referencing the points that are noted within the report.
Just one thing through the chair, if we reference particular paragraphs without going into details on it, then you can't read the recommendations by themselves. You would have to read them with the report. So we're trying to make our recommendations read along, so that you don't have to go back.
And look, the chair is open to advice from this council as to what they want to do, but as Councillor Mackay has just said, the intent is to have 3 simple headings, which has a multiplicity of complexity sitting behind it. And if we were to try to reference all that complexity, then I think it becomes a bit.
I'm happy with the advice that we just got there. It just makes sense. So yeah, that's fine.
Are we happy that I put the motion on?
Kia ora koutou. Look, I think good discussion around the words, and I didn't mind it either way, to tell you the truth, and that's why I'm happy to support the way it's going, because to me the most important thing is actually what we do next. It's not so much these words, it's how we go on. And if you look at clause 7 in the paper, to me that's the most important paragraph in the whole paper, and that talks about that our approach to rivers is changing from a traditional approach to flood and river management to a whole of river approach, recognising the wider range of values in our rivers. This transition is influenced by national direction, including Te Mana o Te Wai, Te Mana o Te Taio, the National Adaptation Plan, and a suite of legislation replacing the RMA. These changes are reflected in the Braid River Revival, Whakamutunga Ngā Aua Pākehē Alliance, and all our river-related work, preparation of the 30-year infrastructure strategy, and acknowledges that work needs to be done with Kapitipi Runanga partners on understanding Te Mana o Te Wai and the whole of river approach. The Braid River Revival 100-year strategy will contribute to this work. I mean, that to me, that's like the real important thing. If you read that first, then the stuff that follows is just focusing in on some themes that we can focus on. So, yeah, I'm just happy to get on with it.
Thanks, Greg. And certainly, I'll just reinforce that these are the things that guide us on everything we're doing. So, Joe.
I'm just trying to understand the process here. So, maybe on the amendments first. So, I think best process would be for us to formally amend it, pass it, and then if grants amendments come into that process would be done for the adoption of the motion as a whole.
So the substantive motion, this is one that's up on the screen, because the mover and seconder agreed to the amendment. That's being the amendment. So if I put this, we'll be voting on this. If somebody. So this is the substantive motion we're discussing now, Joe. Greg, did you want to?
Pretty hard act to follow, Deputy Chair. Here, completely agree.
In which case, we've got the mover and seconder have spoken. I think that closes the discussion. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Great. Thank you very much, everybody. That's really exciting. Good stuff. Right, move on. John.
Just to make a comment on it, when we look at frameworks give us opportunity. And when we narrow things down and become prescriptive, we get ourselves in a challenging space. And when I look at our rules, what's coming out of NESs, MPSs, all the things we want to change and achieve, we are constrained by rules. So having a framework that then has things sitting under it is really important rather than being prescriptive. So I thank people for accepting the framework, and that gives us the ability to be agile.
Thanks, John. A lot of very eloquent speakers, all trying to say the things I would quite like to say, but I'm not smart enough to do. Right, so we move on to 8.3, the work program overview.
I had an amendment to.
No, we've passed. No, we've voted on the substantive motion, and that's been passed now by the council.
Point of order, Chair. I notified you that I had an amendment to this.
We specifically asked if there was any discussion or whether there was any reflection on the motion. There was none. So I'm sorry, it's been.
The motion we were putting, Chair, was
No, Craig, I made it very clear to Joe's question that this was the substantive motion that had been agreed to be amended to this, and that this was the substantive motion that I put to the council, and the council has now voted in favour of. So we're moving on to 8.2. 8.3, the 8.3.
It's not quite what I thought, but yes, I think there's a bit of confusion around that.
I just think it's disingenuous of you, knowing that I had an amendment that I'd circulated to staff, to councillors and staff yesterday, and you knew it was coming, and you knew that I wanted to moot it, basically change that process.
Joe specifically asked the question, what were we discussing? I made it very clear to the council that we were discussing the substantial motion that was up on the screen, that had been moved and seconded, and that and I looked at you specifically, wondering whether you were going to bring forward your amendment. I just assumed that you'd change your mind, Grant. The council has actually, the process has gone through now. So,
Councillor Chair Mackenzie, can we just take 5 minutes here? Can we just take 5 minutes out? to have a discussion about this outside of the room, because I'm just make sure that I make sure that our standing orders have been followed, and I'd just like to check that. I tend to think they have. I beg your pardon? Can we take vote? Yeah.
Right, so we'll call the meeting back to order, please. Thank you. I've got the button on. And the process we've gone through is the correct process. The motion has been passed. But we're happy for Grant to have the floor to talk. He won't be able to revoke the motion that's already been passed, but he might be able to give notice that we can review the decision at another meeting, is it?
Can I just say, that if we test the support for this, there's another mechanism here. So I think Grant needs to have the floor, like you've said, Ian.
Grant, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, obviously confusion in that particular process. I don't know if you're able to put my proposals up on the board so that we can at least look at them. I proposed an amendment to give more clarification to the recommendations. I felt that the recommendations of 3 one-liners was insufficient for the public to understand where we were coming from at a glance. And all I have done there is 1.1 on the co-investment central government is basically extracted a statement directly out of a central government co-investment flood protection scheme supplementary report, which identifies the potential co-investment funding proposals. I believe that, and in that, one of them, it says co-investment up to 75% assistance to cost of works. If we adopt a whole catchment climate change adaptation approach. And I thought, well, that's exactly where we need to head to. The second point there, which obviously I thought that all we were doing in the previous session was changing the name of that, and that was fine with me. We have, I wanted to bring forward the strategic direction that is being focused on here in this report. You have to align that strategic direction with the strategic direction in our 30-year infrastructure plan, which is part of our long-term plan. And that actually talks about whole of catchment-based approaches, including braided river revival projects. And that is the evolutionary pathway for change. We are currently looking at an integrated and holistic approach to our future planning. And all I'm suggesting is that this is a unique committee, unique committee that should really be taking a broader catchment-based approach to the way we not only manage our rivers, but the way that we manage those aspects that contribute to stormwater runoff, filtration, and all those sorts of things. So it's a land and water package within a catchment. And in terms of the deliveries, well, that's just straight out of some direction that government's given us through the national policy statement. So I've got clearly 3 things that are pretty much taken out of documents that already exist, but it clarifies it more than just one-liner. So that's my feeling. And that way, by having all of that information there, we are aligning central government, we're aligning our long-term plan strategy, and we're aligning the NPS freshwater management. And I didn't see anything wrong with that. And I wanted to get that message of a catchment approach really well across, because we have just experienced in the North Island a cyclone that has devastated Hawke's Bay and Gisborne, where through insufficient attention to catchments, and what's going on in those land use in those catchments has resulted in the land falling away into our rivers and destroying, killing people, all sorts of things. And unless we actually take that approach that the government's suggesting, our long-term plan suggesting, and the NPS is suggesting, then we are really not pursuing something that could be really positive for our community. The key words for me are co-investment. It is strategic direction. It is whole of catchment, not just whole of river catchment. I think that's the thing. It's a subset, in my view, that we've been looking at here today. And it's an evolutionary pathway, and things will change. And we have to mana o te wai. I'll end there, and I, you know, if there is another mechanism for me to convey this again, then I would welcome it. But I understand that I've obviously missed the boat by a whisker, and but thanks for the opportunity to explain.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, just in fairness to Councillor Edge on this issue, I think that we should just not debate this now. The opportunity to have a proper debate on this is gone because of a technical issue that we got through. Can I suggest that we need to take this away and discuss how we bring this back and put it in front of the committee? Because a lot of stuff there, a lot of stuff.
Sorry, I cut you off, Peter. Yeah, look, can I just say that if you look on page 26 of the report, there's a diagram which shows a lot of the things that are going on and the different actions and strategies and processes that teams are working through already. And Grant's 3 points he raises here are part of that, but they're not all inclusive. And so if we are going to add components to the 3-point strategy, which are all encompassing, and this goes to the point that Councillor Mackay made earlier, and I think Councillor Sunkel made, we would then need to make sure we include everything that's going on within in terms of our catchment management and our aspirations for catchment management. And that becomes a very long list. So after this meeting, we're going into a workshop, and I think that might be a time where we think about these themes that Grant has brought forward in the context of that workshop. And then if we need to take action from subsequent action as a result of that, let's do that and put that in place some other way, which is sort of what Peter's suggesting. Great.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to debate anything here. I just want to apologise, Grant. I just showed my naivety as a new councillor. So my apologies. Kia ora.
Any other comments, questions? Craig.
Kia ora. Look, I just want to acknowledge, Grant. Look, I don't disagree with anything you said. I think it's all great stuff. And I think that's why I raised clause 7, because I think it is encapsulated in there in the paper already. Not every time do our recommendations tell us everything, even though they should stand alone. But I think, you know, it's a simple recommendation that allows us to just move forward. And I think one of the potential avenues to go down is I'd like us to actually get some stuff out about some of the things we do so that we can explain to the public what we mean by some of our recommendations. So that might be a course of action we could do after this meeting. There's some comms that go out about this focus and pick up the points that Grant's made and explaining that to the public. So that's a potential avenue we could take. So.
Thanks, Craig. Peter.
Yeah, and I fully support what Craig just said there, because we need to have this discussion and it needs to be visible for people to understand that we're actually doing our job. So the opportunity to talk to those points, whether we support them or not, or we've got different views than you have, Grant, we need, as councillors, need to take that opportunity somewhere in the future, and we'll pick that up and do that.
Good. Any other comments? In which case, I'd like to move on because we have time frames. All good. Thank you. Right. If I could ask Lee to come back online. to give us a work program overview, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The work program overview starts on page 19 of your papers. It's quite comprehensive. There's a lot in there from our conversations about co-investment, flood recovery, gravel, shovel ready, braided river revival, and so on. With the chair's permission, I'd like to take the paper as read and stay online for any questions.
Thanks, Lee. Certainly have my permission. Vicky, you've got a question.
Yeah, I've got, I think 3, but one of them I'm going to pick back up on the question I asked before and ask. So in terms of the funding for schemes and for new scheme proposals, as staff at Environment Canterbury, is there sufficient flexibility in our ability to bring funding in from our local communities, understanding, of course, that government funding, that's much less known, and the timing of when we may or may not get funding from government, that's not easy for us to know. But where we're at our own scale within the region, are we able to be flexible enough to go out and do the consultation when we need to pick up on the opportunities and the needs of our communities? Like, is there something that we should be doing as a council to enable better progress? Or is it fine for you? Like, are we, you know, that, yeah, are we enabling you to do your job the best you can?
Thank you, Councillor Southworth. I think a lot of the answer comes down to resources. So staff are certainly moving as quick and fast as we can. We do have budgets in place for things like scheme reviews, but in the last couple of years, flood recovery has delayed those. So we are looking to divert resources back into that area. You do have opportunities through the annual plan and long-term plan. I'm not sure that you could make amendments now to this annual plan. It might be a question for others, given it might be outside the scope of what you're engaging on. But there are those tools. So there's nothing holding us back as staff other than time and resources.
And then there's mention, and you've just referred to it now, just again about resources and in terms of staff and the difficulty of actually attracting staff with suitable qualifications. Are we now able to advertise overseas, particularly given the northern situation is going to probably put only more pressure on? Is that something we are doing that? Are we already advertising overseas?
Yes, we are. All our adverts are overseas, and we are getting international candidates for our river engineering roles. We just had a couple of roles close, and there were international people that applied for them. We haven't done a targeted campaign to the UK or something like that recently, which is something we can talk to people in capability about. I'll just add, part of the reason why I'm not in Christchurch today, I'm down in Dunedin with the regional sector, and we're having a conversation nationally about people and resources, because we are sharing a lot across councils and diverting resource where they're needed, but across New Zealand there is a skills shortage. So it is something we're discussing today about what we can do, all 16 councils together, to try and resolve that issue.
And then one final one, which is around so under the climate change section at the very back of the report, there's a sort of standing bit, and it says climate change impacts are factored into river management planning. Is there a national sort of agreed methodology for incorporating the predicted or anticipated increases in flood flows and the like? You know, is there something, or do we have to, each region determines what they're going to apply in terms of the increases in flood frequencies and scale? How does that work? Is there already a national standard that we can comfortably just, you know, put down in our own rivers, and that's the job done?
There are standards, particularly NIWA has a lot of guidance. I'm not sure if every council uses the same one. I might check if Nick Griffiths is online, or I can see Tim Davey there, if they could answer that in terms of what ECAN specifically does. We do incorporate climate change into our science decisions, and we certainly incorporate it into design when we look to build new banks, particularly in regards to the best information on sea level rise. But I'll just check if there's someone from science that can add to my answer.
Tim's coming forward, Lee.
It appears that Mr. Griffiths isn't online, so I will try and pick it up. The short answer is no, there aren't standards around it, but there is, as Lee said, pretty good guidance and some quite good information. I mean, it's a tricky area, and part of it, I think the reason for a lack of national guidance is knowing that there is quite a lot of variation in the way these things operate. So there's no, I can see where you're getting at in terms of national guidance and saying, do it this way with these data, for instance, and that doesn't exist. But there is some quite good information that allows us to make some estimates, but it does vary across different places.
To supplement, so because essentially there's a degree, it's risk, isn't it? You know, are we putting sufficient scaling up to respond to the unknown of just how fast climate change is coming? And depending on where we pitch that, depends on what level of risk we're possibly unknowingly putting on our community. So it would be good to understand more about what risk we're accepting within that modelling for the predicted future. So yeah.
If I could make a comment, and Lee might jump in here, but that's part of 1.2 effectively, which is to say, what's the increased risk of flood risk from climate change? The other component of that is what's the change in assets that are being protected. So if you take the Ashley River as an example, and you've got proliferation of urbanization on what used to be sheep paddocks, then the assets protected, and you'll see in all our different river rating scheme reports, it's this investment is now protecting so many $1 million or $1 billion worth of assets. So you've got the level of protection required because the assets have changed has increased. And with that goes a higher expectation of flood protection. So from a 1 in 50-year flood event to maybe a 1 in 200-year flood event. And then what does a 1 in 200-year flood event look like in 10 years' time because of climate change? It becomes a 1 in 100-year flood event. So the risk goes up, the value of the assets protected goes up, and the scale of the engineering may need to be bigger because of the change. And these are the things we need. We want our teams to get their heads around and plan for.
To add to the end of that, though, is also when there's catastrophic failure, you might have built a bigger embankment to meet your 1 in 200, and people have comfortably built up behind that. But those are only the design level that it's given to. And what we've just seen up north is a complete failure of schemes that may or may not have been designed to the 1 in 200, I don't know. But essentially there's then that, well, what do we do about that catastrophic risk when there's failure? So just putting it on the table, and I think it's an important conversation to be had and to really understand. Sorry.
All three questions were really valid because this is the nub of the reflections this committee needs to make. So thank you, Tim. Grant.
Thanks, Chair. My questions related to item 44 on page 24 and how it relates to item 66 on page 27. I'm just, there's some figures there about what the 2021 flood recovery process has cost us. And it's reporting that there seems to be about a $2.9 million increase over the original estimates for that. And I was just wondering how that's going to be funded, where it's going to be funded from, and does it have any implications for the current annual plan?
Thank you, Councillor Edge. The reason for the difference in numbers from 2021 is last winter, July, August, we had 7 flood events in 5 weeks. So that caused additional damage on top of what we encountered in 2021. So that's the primary reason for, I guess, the lift in number. The annual plan, which I understand is out for engagement now, has factored in for ECAN's share of that additional damage minus what NEMA will contribute to be added to the existing flood recovery rate. So to be added to the existing debt which council put in place last term is the proposal in the current draft annual plan which is being engaged on, which I'll acknowledge in the very short paragraph 66. I assumed that you had been well briefed on that in annual plan deliberations.
Thanks, Lee.
No, probably some up-to-date figures on that would be good. Again, if the annual plan is accounting for what we had incurred at one point, and now we've got another $3 million on top of it. Is that what you just saying? Am I clear on that? So you had about $4 million plus 3. Is that right?
It's that minus NEMA's contribution, which is 1.7 million. I think so it's, sorry, I don't have the exact number. It's somewhere between 2 and 3 million. I'll just acknowledge Carla and Brian in the room from finance. Carla might know the number. So the extra 2.x million, the proposal in the draft annual plan is to add that to the flood recovery rate loan and debt fund that through general rate.
Thank you. Just a supplementary question then. Just further to the conversation we've just had with Councillor Southworth. Do you think that the community should still be paying for following a business as usual approach to stormwater protection or protection of property, rather than looking at the adaptive processes that the government is suggesting that we should use?
I'm not sure. Can you just clarify how that's related to the flood recovery funding?
Well, I'm just wondering. I mean, basically, we are at the moment. We went to the public last year with a budget, a recovery budget, and then we've exceeded that recovery budget, so they've got more money. So it is affecting our rates, and I'm wondering what the relationship is. Maybe we have to pick it up in our workshop discussion. The relationship between continuing to operate a recovery process, rather than perhaps looking, which is relying on stop bank maintenance and recovery, as opposed to looking at more economical ways of dealing with stormwater and flooding.
I think you're misunderstanding what we're discussing here, Grant. At the end of the day, there was a flood event, and this council agreed to fund that flood recovery across the whole region. There have been some subsequent damage which fell under the same that Lee's team agreed was part of the same event effectively, and NEMA has agreed to that, and so the funding mechanism works the same way. Now, there's quite a lot of damage that is now being handled by the individual river rating schemes as a result of those last July's flooding on top of that. So this isn't the full cost, but this isn't. We're not debating today. I'm sorry, a new approach to how we fund this. That's already been agreed. That point, but any other subsequent questions?
It's an issue we need to talk about more. What concerns me is that we got that money originally through a general rate as virtually a one-off, and then as part of that one-off through the general rate, we're now asking our community to fork out another $3 million because we had another storm event. So it's like this cumulative effects of our current processes, and that is a risk to us.
Peter,
this is more of a strategic discussion for councillors to have about this. This is not a staff question. We should be asking leading questions on that. The river management people's job is to do the things that they need to do because of floods. How we handle those in terms of, I mean, your point is, should we have allowed that? You know, that's what your point is. So strategically, we need to have that discussion, and maybe we need to have it in the workshop.
Well, if I can just point out that actually every time Lee's team came back to needed more money, she came back to the council and the council agreed to do the funding. So if you go back to the records, you'll see it's all sitting there. It's all been agreed. So we can't relitigate decisions that have already been made. So we're going to move on from that discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, can I point the point here though? Surely, Mr. Chairman, is that that's not fully understood by everyone sitting around the table.
Yeah, and that's fair because those decisions were made in the last council, so it won't be fully understood. But the point is that we are in no position at this meeting to relitigate those decisions that have been made because we are, as I understand it, we are obliged to follow through on previous decisions unless we review those decisions. And until today, there's been no discussion about wanting to review it because the council ticked off that funding arrangement. Well, depending on whether you're going to change the subject or not, because
I'm changing the subject. Change the subject. So, Lee, I was just going to key points and the resilience shovel-ready projects. It's nice to see that there's a completion date on there. At the Blue Greens conference, I think I heard the fact that shovel-ready money was wasted, and I wasn't sure that we were where we were with this. So, congratulations on actually having an end date on that. And my question for you is, in terms of when this money was given, was there a time switch on it?
Thank you, Chair Scott. Yes, when the money was given, it was generally for 3-year contracts. So our 3-year contract is up at the end of December, and that signals the current end to that money. Just acknowledging we are asking the question of government, is there any more? But currently, as it stands, there is no more post-December.
And I guess why I asked that was there seemed to be some criticism that people that receive shovel-ready money haven't spent it or haven't finished their projects, and possibly some of them haven't started them. So I think in terms of where we sit with that, it's good to know.
Right, any other questions for Lee? And then we'll move on. If not, we'll thank Lee for leaving her important meetings in Dunedin, and we will ask Jesse to come forward to do his quarterly work program update for Catchment Resilience Committee. Oh, no, hang on, I've got to move a motion first. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. It's this one. The Catchment Resilience Committee notes the overview of the Key Rivers Works Program. Do I have a mover for that, please? Thank you, Jan. Second to Nick. Thank you, Nick. Any discussion of the topic? All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Jesse, please come forward. Jesse.
Tēnā koutou katoa, through you, Mr. Chair. Presenting the quarterly work program update for the Catchment Resilience Committee. So the purpose of this paper is to update the committee on the progress of the Braided River Revival Whakamutunga Awa Apakahi program in the Biodiversity and Biosecurity portfolio, and the leading Flood and River Resilience program in the Climate Change and Community Resilience portfolio. Through those programs, we are looking to create landscape scale alignment, to revive our critical ecological corridors from the mountains to the sea, Kutikitai, and restore connections between people and rivers. Reducing river flood risk to people and property through building and maintaining high quality flood protection, land drainage and erosion control infrastructure while managing our associated land holdings. I'll take the paper as read. Happy to answer any questions. We've got a number of staff online in relation to specific aspects of the work program as well.
Thanks, Jesse. Questions for Jesse, please. Brad.
Thanks, Jesse. I have a question on page 56, the proposed program. I understand the first item there is develop an environment Canterbury land and property strategy, but that isn't specifically a level of service identified for this work. I suppose what concerns me a bit is that this committee doesn't do this in isolation to the work that the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee is doing or is planning to do. Is there likely to be a good synergy and alignment and discussions between the two committees?
Button, please, Jesse.
Yeah, look, the land and property strategy is around managing our assets across the organisation. As you know, we hold a number of assets right adjacent to our rivers in terms of our forestry holdings, recreational reserves, etc. All of our stop banks, plus also the land that we hold within CBD holdings, etc. So, from a corporate perspective, we've got to manage those assets. There's a critical link between the work that we do in this strategy and the Braided River Revival work that we're doing in these programs of work. So, yes, certainly there would be linkages through to the AFRC committee in terms of reporting, I guess, on the various strategic projects that we're underway.
Thank you, Chair. As councillors will recall, the work on the land and property strategy was started some 12 months ago between myself and the Director of Operations. It's recognised that it is primarily about the land that we own or that we would like access to that is along the catchment and along the rivers. That work is primarily now led through the Director of Operations with my support. So that work is looking primarily at the land that's situated alongside the rivers and how we might best use it to protect the environment, but also further some of the other aspirations of council. There is a further briefing being prepared for which Bronwyn, who's working with us on this work, will deliver for council. In parallel to that, we've recognised that there is a separate stream of work around commercial opportunities for income generation, which is being progressed in parallel but slightly separate through myself as the lead director. I think this committee's role in relation to that land strategy is reasonably self-evident, and that I would suggest that the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee's role is to take an overview of whether we are, as an organisation, utilising our land holdings and our opportunities to work with partners in the most effective way to deliver value for money for the ratepayer.
Thanks, Giles. Peter.
Well, I think it's entirely appropriate that it sits within this committee because this is a whole committee of the whole, and it gives us the opportunity to capture those things that we've been talking about since I've been sitting at this table since 2016, getting some strategic value out of all the assets along rivers owned by multiple people. You know, I think the link with AFRC is pretty solid because that opportunity then, what do you want to do with that? It can be put in front of Audit, Finance and Risk. But I think that all councillors need to be involved in this discussion because it is a pretty wide-ranging discussion, and we'll unpack some of this stuff as we go along the way, looking at all sorts of things from this committee's point of view. So I support it being here because I think it's a first start for us, and that strategy coming out of here is exactly what all of council should be doing. We should be doing a strategic look at this stuff, and the sooner we do it, the better.
Thanks, Peter. Any other, Craig?
Yeah, it was a question I had too, so thanks, Grant, for bringing that up, and thanks, Peter and Giles and Jess, for your comments. Yeah, I sort of probably thought that the land and property strategy would go to council more fully, to all of council, would have briefings at that level, with ARC having that overview role, and then this committee having some oversight of those river-related assets. So that's sort of the way I thought it. But am I right in thinking that will go to all council for the overall land and property strategy?
Peter, can Giles answer that?
I would envisage that when we have finalised the strategy and the framework within which we will be recommending the council operates, that it would go to full council for approval. That would be the appropriate place for it to be signed up.
John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I look at Te Hapaiao and we look at our regulatory framework, we look at our resilience, our flooding, our rivers, and then we have transport sitting aside. For me, this sits very much within that resilience of rivers and infrastructure and needs to sit within that space. So for me, it sits in here as part of that rivers resilience hazard and risk space. So I think it is the appropriate place for it.
Thanks, John. David, did you have a...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to add, I mean, obviously the strategy will be giving effect to a number of other committees' outcomes as well: biodiversity, biosecurity, land and water, And so the relevance of the outcomes from the strategy will be across council climate change and resilience as well. So it makes perfect sense. Of course, where the work's led from doesn't mean that it doesn't touch all of those other places. So.
Thank you. Are you, everybody happy?
Look, 5 boxes there under that issue. 4 of them have got strategy in it. That's what we're responsible for. That's what we need to develop. We need to ask staff questions about doing that work for us. We need to take responsibility for this, councillors, because we shouldn't expect staff to work in isolation without understanding what we require.
Thanks, Peter. Any other questions for Jesse? Thank you, Jesse. I shall now put the motion that the Catchment Resilience Committee receives the work program report for the Greater River Revival Whakamutunga na Awa Apakihi program in the biodiversity and biosecurity portfolio and the leading flood and river resilience program in the climate change and community resilience portfolio. Do I have a mover for that? John Sankel's moving it. Craig is no yay, and I should say is seconding it. Sorry, I saw his hand before yours, Joe. Do I have? Is there any discussion of the motion, Grant?
I think this. I said before that this is a unique committee, in that it can bring together a whole lot of different parts of our business, and for a long time I've been suggesting that, well, it's in the MPS as well, of course, the Karakia and whole of river approach is fundamental to the best use of land that we own, but also the potential integration with interagency cooperation. And with my last discussion too, broadening that to a whole of catchment approach is an even better way of developing a strategy for the council that we are considering more than the narrow corridor along a river. So I support this idea, and as long as we are obviously coordinating through portfolios and committees, then that's all good, and it's keeping track of that. So thank you.
We are discussing receiving this report. Vicky, did you want to say something?
I was going to just total call what Grant just said in terms of, and I just note in some of the terminology used in paragraph 4 of this report, it talks about landscape scale alignment and critical ecological corridors, which actually does sort of bring the mind down into a narrow line, which is of course the river, but it's really important to maintain that awareness that it's actually the whole of the catchment and the ground, particularly in a context like Canterbury. There's so much movement from groundwater to surface water and back again. Like it's just is all integrated, and we just have to keep that wider picture in our heads. And I appreciate Councillor Edges keep bringing us back to that same point. So thank you.
Any other? I don't know. We've had so much debate on receiving a report before.
Mr. Chairman, we're receiving the report, but we're asking.
We can get stroppy. I'm not criticising anybody. I'm just commenting on it. Can I will put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Now, the next Catchment Resilience Committee meeting will be on Wednesday, August the 2nd, 2023. I can now declare the meeting closed. And I'll invite Craig to, we are doing the workshop. Would you do it at the end of the workshop? Okay, so I'll close the meeting. Thank you for your participation.